Welcome to another episode of The Breakdown. One of the things that we're seeing, not only in the province, but across the entire country, is, it seems in a lot of ways, a redefinition of what the political spectrum looks like, what political parties look like, and what drives them. So in order to explore a lot of the, I'm going to go with fascinating events that we've seen unfold over the last couple of weeks in provincial politics and federal politics, from a conservative perspective, and all of a sudden I can feel all of the listeners immediately lighting their hair on fire. We are very, very grateful to be able to be joined once again by the host of the podcast Conservative Like Me, which, breaking news, is going to be coming up season 3 pretty soon here. So we're excited about that. Jennifer Sanford. Jen, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. I would say it's good to be here, but I'm always reminded that I'm a conservative on the Breakdown podcast. So I'll reserve my joy until the end of the hour.
That's fair. That's fair. But you know, and this is one of the things that's important. One of the things that we strive for here at the show is when people lock themselves into the tribalism that we see with a lot of politics, very often that leads down some dark roads, foreshadowing for this episode. And we like to believe that the ideas need to be debated on their own merit here. So that's one of the things that we like about having you on the show. So
that's funny. Tell another. No, come on. Let's go.
It's the truth. Okay, so let's start. Now, I gotta preface this, because for anybody who maybe hasn't listened to any of our previous conversations or has not listened to any episodes of Conservative Like Me, which you should, Jen is not.
Yes, you should. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Are you still on Spotify?
I am.
Oh, Neil's coming for you.
Yeah, he sure is.
Jen's view of conservatism is not what a lot of people would associate with what they're seeing from the provincial party in Alberta right now, or what they're seeing from the federal party. So I want you to talk a little bit about, what does conservatism mean to you?
Yeah, no, my view of conservatism is what it is for the majority of Canadians who watch their elected officials on both sides of the political spectrum and just go, is this scripted television? What is happening here? I've always been proud to associate myself as a conservative, because I've always believed that a conservative government says that we empower people, that we know how hard it is to make a dollar, and it's very hard to hold on to that dollar. We want people to be able to hold on to their own dollars and to be able to choose what they do with those dollars in the spirit of creating great communities. We know as Canadian, I think conservatism at its very core is about upholding that Canadians are bright, thinking, enterprising, entrepreneurial people who can do wonderful, remarkable things without the government having to tell them that they have to do those things. So I think that's how I come to be a conservative person. I really do just believe at my fundamental core that the government does not need to scale everything, that on issues of social preview, that the community, that the civic community, us as people, can decide what is right for our values. And we do have a tendency as a group to make very progressive choices. We don't need a government to polarize who we are and what we believe around what we do with our bodies and our minds and our communities. I believe that our economy should be fueled by the market, not by the government. The government shouldn't be your single sole employer. We should embolden businesses to be here, to grow here, to whether they're, these totally innovative new industries or whether they're well-established industries, and that the government basically just exists as like a project manager. Do we have an environmental problem we need to mitigate? Do we have a civic problem we need to mitigate? Do we have a fraction of the population that's not being captured by our civic goodwill and our marketplace entrepreneurship? Then we need to have a program in place to help those people. I just think at the end of the day, conservatism at its very core, at its very fundamental value, puts the integrity back into Canadians Albertans, Calgarians, wherever you may be listening from, and away from this nanny state that a liberal government really believes is necessary in order to make us a full society. I appreciate that that's a super long answer, but I'll try to sum it up this way. In my very first day of university, I had a political science professor, Dr. David Baugh, write on the board, is man and woman good and society makes them behave poorly, or is man and woman bad and society makes them good? And we debated that, as your first day, it's like, welcome to this isn't high school anymore. And I appreciate the point of the exercise. I think conservatism today can say with a really strong pivot, we accept by our very nature that people are good and society is good also. And I think that that's a strong place for conservatism to be right now, especially with the dysfunction that we have going on federally, provincially, and certainly for me in Calgary, municipally.
Okay. So now here's where I'm gonna challenge you for the first time.
Sure.
We'll probably do this a couple times through
I suspect we will.
That sounds like a fairly reasonable model.
Yes.
During normal times.
Yes.
The challenge that we have, and this is one of the big things that the themes that I want to explore with you today, is we decidedly do not live in normal times right now. And it seems like those values, while they are aspirational, they do not necessarily translate into the management of the apocalypse that we've been living through for the last 2.5 years. This is one of the reasons why we have seen all levels of government, municipal, provincial, and federal, step forward with putting restrictions into place. Because while I think it would be safe to say that the vast majority of people are well-intentioned, and on a good day where there aren't profoundly complex issues that have an incredible amount of nuance and require, for some of the issues, a fairly high level of understanding of the subject matter to navigate. When those things start to come into play, that's where it can get a little bit more challenging for people to know what the right thing is to do, particularly when we're seeing the incredible amount of misinformation that we're seeing people being exposed to right now. So to start with, on a scale of 1 to 10, let's go 0 to 10. On a scale of 0 to 10, 0 being, my God, what happened here, and 10 being crushed it. What would you give the UCP government's response to COVID-19?
Oh, like 10. Kenny has been flawless, without flaw, totally since the beginning. See, I just did that so that your listeners could just have that. They could have exactly. They could just have that moment where they just go crazy, and hopefully they weren't driving a motor vehicle. No, I will answer your question because I'm going to give it like a 3, I think, out of 10. Okay. And I think that there's no surprise from the mainstream of conservative. That center spectrum conservative, which is where I live, where most conservatives live, I think would give them like a 3. But I'm not going to put it solely on Kenny. But I do want to just come back to something you said before, that you're absolutely right, that these last 25 months have been totally unprecedented. And my God, am I ever tired of hearing that word and saying that word, as we all are, right? We're with you in these unprecedented times. Oh, for goodness sake, what garbage is that? What I think we have surfaced as a community is, and when I talk about community, I mean like the 35 million of us that are Canadians. What I think we've really surfaced is that there really is a fundamental difference between what we do and how we do it. I don't think that there's a huge amount of credibility for any argument that would say that we didn't need to have some kind of a lockdown. We were trying to stay alive in the early parts of these pandemic waves. We were trying to stay alive. We were genuinely fearful. I was fearful. I'm sure you, Nate, were fearful as well. Many people with young kids, like there were so many unknowns to this thing. And as we created an ecosystem of trying to function with information and disinformation, I think we realized maybe lost sight of the fact that there is this difference between what we do and how we do it. And I'll use the example of the vaccine. We all needed to get vaccinated. I'm vaccinated. And I'm proud to be vaccinated. Everyone in my ecosystem is vaccinated. We needed to get as many Canadians vaccinated as possible. We knew that was going to be like the key to opening this up. We knew we were going to be fighting variants and fighting all these pieces, but we knew a vaccination piece was going to be key to this. The difference is that rather than, and I will put this on our provincial government, rather than saying we need to get everybody vaccinated, and here are the 70 things we're going to do to try and fight the disinformation to get you vaccinated. And I'm not talking about incentives. I'm talking about language. I'm talking about being able to demonstrate that we know that there's people who are going to be so far on the, if you put something in my body, I'm going to just scream and I'm going to throw a fit. We knew that there was going to be people who are going to be like, I'm scared, and not even just scared of like what the vaccine was, but just scared of even just getting a vaccine. I mean, think of us as adults. Like, I took a really good friend of mine to be vaccinated twice, and he just shook, and he was a grown person. And we never really gave time and space for those people who were like, I have to go to this mass site and I have to be vaccinated. What we did as a society was we said, there will be us, the vaccinated, and you, the pieces of shit. And the minute we split that out, it got really hard for us to kind of come together. And what we did is when we started to really push against one another in terms of there having to be winners and losers on vaccines, we started to kind of come apart a little bit. And then it got easy to come apart on everything else, right? Our superordinate goals, which is those values that define us as a society started to kind of come apart a little bit. And then it became about everything. It became about, I'm not going to wear a mask. So there were the mask wearers, and then there were the pieces of shit that didn't wear a mask. And then we started to do it with the vaccine passport. There were the people who dutifully showed their passport and their piece of ID, and the people who freaked out and were called Karen at the grocery store, regardless of their race and gender. We started to come apart, and I think it became part of the purview of three groups: the federal government, the provincial government, and the news media, to help to hold that kind of breaking apart accountable. And instead, what we did at all three places was we made it politically advantageous. And that will be something that we will actually, I think, as a society have to heal from. And I think what we're seeing now in Ottawa is another piece of that. It's that classic Saul Alinsky type of public relations, where it's like, pick a target, freeze it, personalize it, polarize it until somebody can win and somebody can lose. And I just don't believe that we're that kind of a people. And I don't believe that we're that kind of a country. And I think we've been served such a raw deal on both sides of the political spectrum by people looking to find an opportunity to make that politically advantageous.
Okay.
Now I can answer your question on the Kenney government, but I feel like you might want to issue a reply to what I said.
I just have more questions. So here's one of the things that I think a lot of people are struggling with, and we'll talk about it provincially, because health is by and large the sandbox of the provincial government, and the provincial government has certainly had the most control and influence over the reaction to COVID and health restrictions. And in particular, and this is my personal axe that I like to grind, the communications from the provincial government on COVID have been, on the very best of days, inconsistent, on the very worst of days, inflammatory and very bad.
Well, gee, Nate, tell me what you really think.
Well, but here's my thing. We started out the pandemic. We had Mr. Kenney minimizing things from the word go. It's just a flu. And that was despite the protests of the scientific community, who said, oh, no, this is very, very bad. Please don't say that. But he continued with that narrative. And he has continued through the last 25 months, vacillating between, it's not that big of a deal, it's going to be mild, best summer ever, to we might have to do some things. I don't like doing these things. These things are bad. We're restricting your freedoms. That's bad. I don't want to do it. And I mean, using the vaccine passports as an example, one of the things that I struggle with is we seem to have lost the plot about what freedom is. And I don't know how much of that is a conservative thing. I don't know how much of it is a other end of the spectrum thing. But I have the freedom to do just about anything that I want to do. I do not have the ability to do those things without consequence. And I think that it's a big part of social contract that we set things up so that, yeah, there's certain things that, like, you want to go to a campsite, you can go to a campsite. You want to go for a drive around the block, walk around the block, you go for a drive around the walk. Go do the thing that you want to do. But there are certain things where we say, you know what, if you're going to go for that drive around the block, we don't want you to drive through a residential neighborhood at 210K. And with an extreme example like that, most people are able to look at it and go, yeah, that's reasonable. But because of the way that the conversation was framed from the get-go of asking anybody to do anything above and beyond what they're used to doing, and applying any sort of consequence to any choice that wasn't in line with what the best scientific evidence is at the time, which was evolving, to be sure, seemed to be translated into, but my rights and freedoms. And that was a conversation that, to me, was largely led by a lot of the conservative elements and the Green Party. I mean, I'll throw them under the bus too, because they seem to buy it. Oddly, like, that weirdest horseshoe ever. But like, I'm curious what you make of that.
Yeah. So there was about 75 questions in there. So let me try to unpack that as best I can here. So first of all, when public trust and confidence is low in a leader going into a crisis, the crisis is compounded that much more. It's just that much more difficult. So, like, imagine if we're all on a sailboat and it's capsized twice and it's taking on water and it's leaking and we don't have a compass and we're a little bit of, there's no map and we're out of money and we don't really have a destination. And then we hit a hurricane. We then, as a province, all just look at each other and go, oh my God, we're going to die. And so I think that is part of it. We came into it with low public trust and confidence. Like, you and I were talking about Kenny Trouble long before we had to talk about Kenny Trouble plus COVID. So it's important to really encapsulate the consequences of low public trust and confidence in a leader then headed into a pandemic, which was not occurring at the federal level, right? Trudeau had good likability numbers headed into this crisis, and it allowed him to do all of his special things, which is, the cry that one singular tear. And like, it was good for him because it got an emotional appeal, and he does good on emotional appeals. Kenny does not. So that, like, there's a piece of this, like, things we know to be true. Things we know to be true about Kenny before and after and during a pandemic, and even today, is that he looks at the country through an economic point of view. Everything that he's done, his whole, brand Alberta has been about economic power, punish people that harm the economics, remove red tape, embolden business, fine business, you punish municipalities who make business hard to do. It's really been the economic message. So when you have an economic purview and point of view when you're governing, you have to take inherently more risk. So, risk was what he did. Risk was what he took. Do I have to listen to Dina Henshaw every day? I'm going to take the risk that I don't. Can I open up earliest to try to capture some of this economic revival? Yes, I can. Can we afford to be spending more money than we're making this much longer? No. So I have to open up. So he made a lot of choices to look at the common good through the lens of economics versus the individual rights of our health and safety. And that's why we had such a dysfunctional response, is because we had an economic premier. We chose an economic premier. It would have been a different experience with higher trust and confidence and a premier who had a different intake of value systems. But we got what we got. And I think he was incredibly consistent with brand Kenny through this entire, he looked uncomfortable wearing the mask. Then he didn't want to wear that. Like, he was who he was. So, that's part of it. On the piece about freedom, you're right that so many of these freedom conversations came from conservative voices. But what you have to remember is that the majority of conservatives at the center of the spectrum, like me, who really, read the newspaper and try to vote in an intelligent way and believe in the old brand conservative that I spoke about at the top of the show, we stayed home. We got vaccinated. We showed our pass. So I'm always mindful when fringe groups, fringe groups, I just said it. When a small token of people try to speak for the mass and then say we're conservative. I've rallied on this on my conservative like me podcast for 2 seasons now to say that that we find these crazy people and then they're like, I'm crazy and I'm conservative. And we're like, no, it's okay. You can be crazy aside from having to identify as conservative. And I know that people on the far left side of the spectrum who want to have a lot of, government control and oversight as well. They're not helping their movement on the other side either. So it happens on both sides, but I will just say that I think there's this forgotten caption of conservative people who are like, okay, let's make a social contract. Part one of that social contract is I will stay home. I will get vaccinated. I may be doing it out of compliance because I don't like it. And I will try to engage in the programs that you establish. I'm concerned about this whole governing what you put in my body. I'm concerned about, this whole idea of like pay to play movement. But for the most part, if you've gotten into a car and put on a seatbelt, you understand movement with control. If you've ever done that in your life, you understand movement with control. The majority of people were there. I mean, look at our vaccination rate. We're 80%, man. That's great. We did great. That's 80% of people. And a good majority of them were hustling up off the top, right? This wasn't like a back end number. This was a front end number. We should be proud of that number. We did it. That was people getting vaccinated, even if they were scared or unsure, or if they got really sick. That's the other thing we never talk about. People who got all 3 vaccines and were like, I can't manage a 4th. I got so sick. So, we want to honor those people as well. But I think, the freedom conversation, I think, is the second part of that, which is that, okay, wait a minute. If I did all the things, if I did the vaccine and I stayed home when you told me to, and I worked from home, even though it sucked every day, and, I live in sweatpants now, and, now I'm ready to have a conversation about what's next. And I think for some people, when that conversation is met with silence, people are like, excuse me, I don't think you're honoring the social contract that I think we thought we had, which is that we'll do our part, but then we got to open up. We got to open up when we feel like we're there. And Canadians have been saying, we've been polling them. They feel like they're there. They feel like they're ready. So there's the freedom piece, freedom. And then there's the social construct of the deal that we had between we'll do our part. And then you as a government have to do your part.
I'm curious though, and I want to come back to Kenny as the economic premier, because I want to try to run a different interpretation by it. But before we do that, I'm curious. You talk about the social contract. You talk about people feeling like, well, we're done now. I feel like we're done, and a lot of the evidence. Like you take a look at who's calling for, I think it's safe to open up. I think we're done now. You're talking about politicians. You're talking about people who are focused on the economy. You're talking about people who are not epidemiologists. They're not healthcare workers. And it one of the things that concerns me is it seems like the drive of that narrative is coming from people who have, I'm just going to be really blunt, not a great idea what they're talking about. And that's there's certainly been a feeling, and I'm not one to say, I mean, believe me, I have the I really want this to be over. Can we please, I would like this to be over now. But at the same time, because of the ecosystem that I operate in, I know it's not over. And so one of the questions that I have is, when we have these leaders who are supposed to be guiding us as a collective society through this shit show, why aren't they talking about what's actually going on? Like, I get that feelings drive votes, and I get that feelings drive donations. Totally get all of that. But it seems like, to me, what a lot of conservative figures have done, and we're going to get to the last couple of weeks, I promise. But it feels like what they've done is, people want to be done, and I don't want to tell them that we're nowhere near done. So I'm going to say, yeah, I'd like to be done too, and not do the leadership piece and the caveat of, World War II was more than 2 years. Sometimes bad things happen and they take a little while to navigate, often longer than we'd want them to. Why do you think we haven't seen that messaging from conservative figures?
Why haven't we seen that messaging from liberal figures? Why haven't we seen that messaging
as well?
Why haven't we seen that from anybody? You're absolutely right that this pressure to open up is being generated by political leaders, but for Canadians, it's a natural progression. If you think about it, these are the same people that shut them down, right? Like, Kenny told me to stay home, therefore Kenny will reverse it. So yeah, you're absolutely right that the, epidemiologist. Thank you. See, that might be proving my whole point. Medical experts, people on the ground in medical settings, people responsible for educating our young people in classrooms, and all of those experts who have the lived experience in education. You're absolutely right that their voice has not been captured. But you also have to remember that we live in a different spectrum of influence based on decision making. I've talked about this on my podcast before as well, which is that 50 years ago, we used to buy toothpaste because a dentist told us 4 to 5 dentists recommend this toothpaste. And then we were like 4 to 5 moms recommend this toothpaste, as we started to value the family unit as a key decision maker and key influencer. And now we live in a world of Kylie Jenner says, this is the toothpaste for you. So we live in a world where we have changed the influencer to garner our behavior. So we have that going as a construct. So we can thank social media and reality television for that. But on the political side, people watch their political leaders update them every day and tell them what to do. Now they're looking for those same political leaders to honor the other half of the social contract, to open it up. The question that I'm wondering from every possible layer of government, including Calgary's municipal government, is why can't they come up with a giant chart that says here, here, and here equals here? If we get down to this level of infection rate, this level of vaccination, this level of hospitalization, this is what we're going to open up, so that we're all operating with the same information. And then we report as best we can. That is my frustration. But I will say, as someone who's worked in crisis communication for as long as I have, you can come into a crisis okay or really well, but no matter what happens, you always come out of a crisis dysfunctionally. Wrapping up a wild state of normal never goes well. So I think maybe need to be mentally prepared as a society that this isn't going to wrap up well. And you're starting to see the wheels come off, right? You're starting to see, we're like, don't get tested for COVID. If you have the flu, just assume you have COVID. So now Dina Henshaw reports the numbers, and we're like, that number could be any number. That number could be imaginary number. So you're starting to see the wheels come off. So I think as you're starting to see things that were really structured become unstructured, as you're starting to see the political piece of this, the political pressure of this come in, you're starting to see the wheels really come off. And that's really the unfortunate piece of this thing. But again, I don't think it's exclusive to just a conservative problem. I think we're seeing that federally in the Liberal government. We're seeing it municipally in municipalities across Canada. It's coming apart. And I don't think it's coming apart from a partisan problem. Now, Kenny does have the issue, which I think should have had more time and attention from the very onset, that we have a very big difference between our urban and our rural communities. And we have some communities who have been saying our infection rates were low and remained low, and we were applied the same constraints as municipal areas who were in absolute crisis. And I think where that was misinformation that needed to be communicated, like, let me explain to you how per capita works. or when there was a difference, I do think we might have benefited. And I hate to be a Monday morning quarterback on a pandemic because everybody is going to be like, coulda, woulda, shoulda. It's not like we have a pandemic every 8 years. Our generation has not known one of these. Political leadership has never walked us through one of these. But I think one of the things that we will come out of this by knowing is that we may be one province, but maybe we had to be considered in zones. Maybe we needed to have a Northwestern zone, a Calgary zone, an Edmonton zone, a South zone, and zones had different phases. Remember when after 9/11, America had the terrorism level, and depending on what color you were in, your response was different. Maybe we're going to learn as a province that was the response that we needed so that we could say that you didn't have people going absolutely crazy in Grand Prairie because they were like, we have low infection rates. Why do we have to stay home? Why is everything closed? We can open up some things, let our industry move because we had to protect Calgary. Right. And I appreciate, don't forget, I work for airline, everybody. So don't forget that I've not lost sight of the fact that people move between those places. But I think as long as we had infection rates that were within different pockets, I think maybe we could have done something. But, the provincial government wasn't prepared to have any of those discussions with Albertans. And that, if you've been following me on this podcast, guys, I've said that to Nate before. Kenny really brought the purview of the federal government with him when he came in as premier, which is that thanks for your vote. I'll be in Edmonton. I'll let you know what you need to know. And Albertans do not function that way. We wanted to be brought along, right? You make choices. We talked about Aish the first time I was on your podcast. Remember Aish when Aish was a huge deal? Remember when those golden days of thinking those were our biggest problems? That program was a great example of needing to bring people along to say, like, this is where we are. This is where we have leakage. This is where we have under coverage. Could we have a better solution? Don't see this as, vilification. See this as trying to correct the program. And I will tell my own staff to cool it on Twitter as we have this intellectual discussion with you. I've always said that I think the legacy of Kenny will be that he underestimated that, yeah, we're rough and tough and we drive trucks and we do all those things, but we're also articulate, bright people. We are that. And I think we never got credit for that.
I'm going to spend a little time playing with that idea of yours with the benchmarks, because I agree with you 100% that there should have been clear benchmarks for what's going to trigger what. Yeah. And I think that this plays into the point that I wanted to challenge you on about Kenny being the economic premier. I don't think Kenny's ever been an economic anything. I think that Kenny's focus singularly has always been the pursuit of power. And I think that's why we have seen that we didn't get metrics and we didn't share those metrics and we don't share those numbers. I mean, if we've seen anything from this provincial government, it has been to try to make things as opaque as possible. We've seen municipal governments clamoring to get the data that the province has made these decisions on. Kenny's refused to do it. We have seen, even with the best summer ever trademark, the metrics that led into that, nobody knew what they were. And I think that part of the problem that we're seeing is that because Kenny's vision is singularly political and it's singularly based on the expansion and consolidation of power, if he was to say, here's what the numbers are, here's what the goalposts are, this is what we're going to target, and it will trigger this, and it will trigger this, and it will trigger this, he would be put in a position where he would no longer be in a place where he could do what's politically expedient at a whim. And I think that is not something that is in his bandwidth for him to be able to do, because he always wants to be able to say, oh, but it's this, or oh, but it's this. I don't think that Mr. Kenny traffics very well in empirical data. Am I wrong?
Yeah, I mean, data-driven decision-making is a noble way to govern until you realize the nature of the political forces that keep you in your job or outside of your job. I think, okay, how do I say this? How do I talk about this fairly is my challenge that I have with you now, because if we're going to talk about the consolidation of power, we damn well better be talking about Justin Trudeau and whatever the hell he tried to pull off for 25 months. But on the topic of of Kenny. I don't share your purview that it was about the consolidation of power. I think he just has an incredibly authoritarian purview of what leadership is. Like I've always said, and I've certainly said this in conservative circles when I've had the opportunity to speak, is that I believe that the type of adaptive leadership that Alberta needs, and Alberta will always require adaptive leadership because we are an incredibly adapting, we're a constantly iterative and evolving society because we're young and entrepreneurial and work very hard and do all those great things that make us proud to fly the flag, whether it be red or whether it be blue. But what am I trying to say here? Adaptive leadership is the process of saying, I don't have one singular grand vision, and it is not my purview to put my vision upon other people. It is not my purview to have a bully pulpit and to communicate from that. Adaptive leadership is about saying what is important to this community and how can we manifest it? How can we appreciate that our strengths really are our differences, and how can we embolden the things that are important to people even when those things are in conflict, and how can we manage the greater good and individual rights all at the same time, which is possible, especially with such a young province like ours. That adaptive leadership was never present. But if you think about it, he never even ran on it. It's not like he got in that blue truck and he's like, blue truck's for everyone. Get in the blue truck with me. He was like, this is me in a blue truck. Thank you. I'll be in Edmonton. So we also have to know, like, what you see is what you get with Kenny, right? So that's what we chose. It seems to me like conservatives are going to have an opportunity to make another choice here in 2.5 months.
Yeah, well, I think you're very right there. Conservatives will have. I mean, there's questions about how. I'm going to go ahead and use the word legitimate that choice may or may not play out. There's been some challenges with voting stuffs in the Conservative Party in Alberta. Not saying, just saying.
Not saying, just saying over here too. Yeah, I get it. I mean, and it drives me crazy because we are the party of everything being above the board, about like that is the purview of conservatism, is trying to give a really genuine voice to that blue tent of people who identify as conservatives. So yeah, believe you me, when it gets real hard to be a conservative and talk about conservative and represent conservative values, when you know that absolute bullshit can emerge at the polls when it comes to selecting a leader, or even I've seen it federally in terms of electing, if there's a contest between two conservatives and they have to have a runoff to see who are represented on the ballot in a federal election. That kind of stuff has got to go. But I am seeing younger conservatives stepping forward and saying, if this isn't going to be legit, I'm not going to be part of it. And conservatism cannot survive without young people.
The last question that I want to get on Mr. Kenny, and it's part of a broader theme, and then we'll talk about some federal stuffs. But it seems like he's playing with powers that he doesn't fully, I don't know if it's understand or appreciate the enormity of, because one of the things that we've consistently seen from him is he seems to try to play that political communications management game, and then sets himself up for a worse situation that he's going to have to try to deal with, because he's looking for what's politically expedient in the moment. And we've seen the same thing with the federal Conservatives. I mean, just in the last couple of weeks, we saw the previous leader of the Conservative Party talk about how he would be willing to meet with members of the Freedom Convoy. And then when the wheels started to come off for him, he turned around and he issued what was probably one of the most rational and intelligent communications I've seen come out of his office, where he talked about what the future of conservatism could potentially look like, and the choices that the people who make up the conservative movement in Canada are being faced with. What do they want conservatism to look like? Does it progressive or is it regressive? And his caucus responded by saying, okay, bye.
Well, that's a very fantastical way to organize all those thoughts. So let me just unpack them in a different way. Kenny's challenge of communication, just to get out of Kenny and into the federal, Kenny's challenge of communication is that he was always stacked in his office with people who prescribe to climax thinking, which is the belief that the the best way we can possibly be doing things is the way that we are doing them. His entire leadership, his entire way to speak to Albertans and Canadians at large. Because remember when he was speaking to people from Quebec, talking in 2 languages, like it's been a wild ride for him. I think had there been a sense of challenge within that office to be able to say, is this really the best way we can possibly be doing this? I think it gives credibility to the argument that I've made from a political communication standpoint for years now, which is that you need outsiders to be part of your coalition. You need people who disagree with you. You need people that come from industry and the public sector and nonprofit organizations, not just, career civil servants who are like, let's just pull out the playbook. The playbook wasn't working. If he was a football team, he would not have won a game in 4 seasons. The coach would have been fired. The team would have been fired. We would have had a new defensive coordinator long ago. All of those things needed to occur. But there was such a penchant for insular thinking. And I think it's really unfortunate because it leaves people, it leaves thinkers like me out who are proud to be conservative, but don't particularly align to the whole idea of, well, this isn't working, but let's keep going purview of political communications. I think that he would have benefited from having the ability to step back and say, who will challenge my climax thinking here, so that I can recognize what's not working. Instead, I think that he insulated more and surrounded himself with more people who woke up every day and were like, this is the best way. This is going great. This is the best way this could possibly be going. And I do think that will be the legacy of the Matt Wolfs, of Brock, of all those guys. And guys is the word that sort of defined that leadership around him.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up. I mean, I would, before I'm going to make the point first and then I'll make the other point. But there has been a noticeable difference in tone from the issues management department of the premier's office since Matt Wolf left and Tarayago took over. We have not seen her insert herself into the conversation with anywhere near the same veracity with which Mr. Wolf did.
But much like O'Toole's gorgeous State of the Union on conservatism, it's too little too late.
Would it be fair to paraphrase everything that you just said and say more political leaders need to realize that sycophants are bad?
Well, I'll stick with my argument on climax thinking, but I do think that there's an opportunity to really pull from industry. I mean, I'm always struck by the fact that I think Alberta, and I'll say this more than Ontario and Quebec, I think Alberta has some of the best communications people, some of the best political minds of any of the provinces, underutilized.
Okay. Are you still a member of the Federal Party? Were you a member of the Federal Party?
I am.
So tell me what you see. What are your thoughts over the last week there?
So if you've been following along with my podcast, you'll know that we've put out a season every time there's been a leadership change. So season 2 really welcomed in Erin O'Toole, and that podcast series is not that old. So I feel frustrated. Because Erin O'Toole's legacy will be defined as good in theory, poor in execution. And I hate that for him. I hate that for the party. And I hate that for members of the party. The idea that we need to change the channel and have a different conversation with Canadians was right. The idea that we didn't need to be the angry politician was right. The problem that we had was we still needed someone to say, what gets this guy out of bed in the morning? Like, what is he going to fight for? And when you waffle on an issue, when you stand still long enough, waiting to make a decision on your position, standing still becomes your position. And that became the fate of Erin O'Toole. So the danger is what happens now. And history would tell us that what happens now is that we just go, let's go back to what we think it was working, which is let's go back hard social right. And let's find the person who can yell the hardest. And let's go back to the polls. Neither one of those will serve us very well. And I don't think it represents what conservatives want. I'm very clear, and I've been very vocal on social media, which has gotten me, a lot of fun DMs over the last week to say, I think that there are salvation groups here that we can find. Conservative women need to come forward now, because we need to come forward and say, hey, as a member, you're not going to talk about my body anymore. I don't want to talk about my body anymore. My body's mine. We've run this gamut. Let's talk about something else, right? I want, young people to come forward and say, let's have a reasonable discussion about freedom. Let's redefine what freedom means so that we're all operating on the same wavelength of what freedom really is actually defined as. Because to your earlier point, I actually have a copy of the charter that hangs in my office. I actually have a copy of it. I look at it and I consider it to be a very important document in who we are as people. 50% of the population talks about our freedoms in a way that they have no idea what they are, which allows the entire argument to be totally cheapened. It allows the entire argument to be totally cheapened, and it allows our message to be dismissed. So we need young people, we need women, we need all these little groups to come forward and say, I am a stakeholder in shaping what this party is. And at this point, we need to not only shape it by what it can be, we also need to shape it by the things that it will not be. And we cannot go back to social conservatism anymore. There are not the vote. There's no path to electability there. And we cannot have a leader that even wants to talk about it. And that has to be the positive legacy of Aaron O'Toole, that he brought in really the end of that conversation. We need.
But it seems like the opposite's happened. Because
yes,
Aaron O'Toole was voted out by caucus. We have Mr. Poilievre. I just anglophonize the hell out of that. And
it's Poilievre.
There we go, Poilievre. He's known for his rational hot takes, and he's been one of the leading contenders. I really, really liked the first season of Murphy Brown, the first run of Murphy Brown. The reboot that they did, I had a hard time getting into. This third attempt at Murphy Brown, though, is like, good people on both sides, you're going to throw that down? Like, I don't understand what they're doing. Help me understand.
Well, the thing about Aaron O'Toole is that he lacked the fight in a constructive way. So he was so afraid, I think, of the fight of being the angry white male politician screaming at a liberal government, which he knows voters do not want, that he became flat-footed. And that, I believe, was what was not tolerated by the party, is where are you on this trucker convoy? Where are you on the freedom convoy, or whatever we're calling it? And he's like, well, I don't know. Let's just, and again, standing still. And if you continue to stand still, then you're a guy standing still at the time when 54% of Canadians want to talk about getting back to work and getting restrictions lifted. 75% of Canadians want to talk about what the future of the vaccine passport is going to be. Good cross sections of the population are worried about our human health post-pandemic. You've got fringe groups everywhere trying to infiltrate what is not a clear-cut message. So you've got all this dysfunction happening, and then you've got a leader standing still. And that is why Aaron O'Toole is no longer the leader of the Conservative Party.
But like, I don't envy his position, nor do I envy any politician's position in Ottawa, because the Freedom Convoy is, on just its face, if we take it purely at superficial value, I mean, that's a pretty good brand. Who doesn't like freedom, right? But when you start to peel back the layers of that particular onion, things get rotten real quick. And so I can understand, like, I don't envy any politician who is faced with the question, would you meet with the leaders of the Freedom Convoy? Well, given that they're coming to Ottawa with a memo of understanding that says we want to completely upend democracy in Canada, I can understand why any like that's what I don't understand. Why did they lead with that? Why didn't they say these people are literally coming here with a document that says they want to get rid of our democracy? No, I'm not going to meet with them because they don't respect our form of government. But instead of that, it was like, good people on both sides.
Yeah. Okay. So I don't share your purview on this issue. I really don't. And I have to be careful what I say because I don't want to be murdered. So here's my thing. Let's just step away for a minute. I don't think we really knew as a political infrastructure and even as a society what this convoy really was going to be. I really don't think that we really knew. And I don't think that that's an unfair statement. One of the questions that I wrote down in advance of chatting with you was, what was this convoy's central message? And was it the same when it started as when it arrived? And I think the answer is no. So I think it started with a lot of gusto. I think it started with this, we're going to Ottawa, we're going. And people were like, yeah, go. And so they started, and I think we saw this certainly in the news footage where what did we see? Confederate flags, swastikas, a lot of men shirtless for some bizarre reason. Someone's gonna have to unpack that on a separate episode for me. We saw all of this wildness, and it allowed us to do what we always do, which is go, oh, good, that's crazy. I can just discount that, right? I mean, just take it one step back on what we know about civil society. When things are scaled by government, there are good things and bad things. When things are scaled by the market, there are good things and bad things. When things are scaled by civic society, civil society, there are good things and bad things. And one of the most difficult things is something we call capture, which is that a movement begins and all these other little voices are like, oh, I'm part of this. I'm part of this also. And then by the time it's moving, it's really hard to discern what its central voice is. And sometimes even from within, you don't know what it is. And I think we have to acknowledge that happens more often than we think. And I'll use examples. Remember the Women's March? We're all women. We're marching. We're not quite entirely sure what we're marching for. I mean, look at even what happened in the United States with the Women's March. Suddenly we're like, wait a minute, you're pro-life? Get out. You're not part of this. You're not considered a woman marching. Right. You also want to work with the police? No, we're only a defund the police women's, like it had to rip itself apart in order to figure out what it was. And I think the convoy had to do that too. The unfortunate part is that whenever you see something conservative moving, you have a tendency to have some pretty nasty voices associate itself with that. And unfortunately, those individuals received a disproportionately large amount of media coverage than I think they were deserved. And I think the convoy was earned. So they kind of get into Ottawa and everybody's like, what is going to happen here? Like, what is going to happen here? I think we didn't know. So we can't totally blame a politician for being like, I'm unprepared to state my association with this group until I see what they manifest themselves at. And we cannot fault them for that because we as people do that, right? We like, if you're listening right now, I hope you're nodding your head because we as people do that. Let's just wait and see if this is crazy. And then I'll see, because we also live in a society where we can't seek information. The minute we seek information, we're automatically affiliated with that, right? We've accepted that as a new societal norm that is not serving us. That if I associate with something, I'm automatically a terrible person. A micro example of that will be when I brought on a podcast producer to do Conservative Like Me, where I wanted to talk about freedom of expression. I want to talk about, and I'm very progressive as a conservative. My podcast producer was like, I'm going to lose jobs. People are going to be upset with me for being affiliated with you. And I'm like, well, you're not on the podcast. You're not like, yeah, fuck those guys. Like you're not part of it. Right. And he's like, it doesn't matter. It's my association with you that will destroy my own brand. So we do this as a society. So it's natural that politicians would do that. But then they got there and it got really interesting, right? They built some kitchens. They didn't riot. They didn't. A lot of people thought there was going to be a lot of people. One of the city councilors for the city of Ottawa is on record by saying, "This is an insurrection. This is an insurrection. This is our turn." Yeah, I don't think anybody I don't think we've had an insurrection in Ottawa. I think that there are duplicitous people that are there to do nefarious things in the spirit of association. But if you get into this heart of this convoy, you're kind of seeing these pockets of pride. And I want to float out an idea for your audience to see just how much hate I can get. Is it possible that this is our displaced pride that should have come from the vaccine? Like we all wanted to be vaccinated, and then we were going to be like, you guys, look, we survived a pandemic, then we all got the shot, and now we're like a better society. And instead we turned on each other and ripped each other apart. Now we're seeing in Ottawa people waving a flag, saying this is our country. I heard a group today singing, "Oh, Canada." They're setting up soup kitchens. People are showing up with money. People are saying, like, we got to help these guys. It's going to get cold. Guys and girls, guys and people, all people. It's, there is a sense of a little bit of flag waving pride happening there. And while there is a message of freedom, which we have yet to really truly define, there's also a message of we want to be heard as Canadians. We want our voice to matter in the places of power. And those are kind of Canadian values that have led us through 150 years. So I wonder if we can have a discussion about the convoy under some of that context.
I don't know if we can, and I'll tell you why. I struggle with that. I feel like that's the sheep's clothing that the originators of the convoy knowingly wrapped themselves in. The patriotism, the unity. I think that was a very deliberate choice of what's the least offensive way that we can pull this thing off. And I think that's certainly part of the appeal for a lot of the people who have kind of seen it and gone, but they're waving flags. So that's nice. And they're talking about unity, and that's nice. And as I said, freedom's a great brand. But when you take a look at who the originators of the convoy were, when you take a look at what the actual infrastructure behind this thing, before it took on its own sort of organic Occupy Wall Street feel, these are people who are, there's public record. I mean, Pat King, you want to talk about Pat King?
No.
Yeah, well, neither do I, because he's super gross. But the core organizers of this convoy are not people who have a very demonstrated history of, these are we're for a Canada that's inclusive. We're for a Canada that allows everybody to be who and what they want to be. These are people who are old stock Canadians and who don't want to see the change. The overt racism that we've seen from several of the organizers is again public record. They agreed on the memo of understanding in regards to what the goals were going to be, and they talked about that all the way across the country. And as much as I do totally appreciate that there are people who saw the convoy as an expression of fatigue and frustration, I if it, that to me is the window dressing on the outside. And if I really wanted to flip the script and get myself in a lot of trouble, to use their own language or the language of some of them, that's like saying, well, the pizza place has a really, really nice overhang on the front door and everything, but boy, the basement.
Yeah, okay. That was a lot. My rebuttal to that, which I think is going to be what all conservatives would say. I think I can speak for a good swath of conservatives here, a good swath of Canadians, maybe even, when I say that there's the original intent, there's whatever that document was, like the manifesto of what we are, but then there is what showed up. Then there is what Canadians shaped that shaped this movement to be. And this is the same argument that I made in Canada Day. All the debate that we have about flying our flag totally misses the argument that the flag is what we make it. This is our flag. We shape it. And I think Canadians have said, wait a minute, this is our movement. We'll shape it. We'll shape it. And we shaped it into what I think is a lot of goodness. So that would be the moral equivalent of saying, like, okay, so, a former conservative prime minister was a proponent and an architect of residential schools. Therefore, for me to be a conservative today, I must be a supporter of residential schools. And if you take that as the quote from the episode, I will kill you as the promo. What I'm saying is,
Here's what Jennifer Sanford said.
Things are, oh my God, can you imagine? Can you imagine what breaks my heart? But things are what we shape them to be. So there's the original intent of this convoy. There's whatever it was when it started. I remember it when it drove through my community, I was like, oh boy. And then there's what arrived. And then there's what is happening today. There's a lot of community spirit happening in Ottawa right now. A lot of horn honking. You're really pissing off people of Ottawa. I feel for the residents there, but there's a community spirit that's happening there that is undeniable. There's a desire to have a conversation. There's a desire to bring to our state news media that, many of these people are saying, we don't speak for all truckers, but I am speaking for my community. I'm here just representing my family. Lots of people today, I listened to a man say, I'm here because, I know people that lost their business because they didn't feel comfortable asking people for their personal medical information. Now that the pandemic can be over, maybe there can be an opportunity for that to be reversed. I'm here, I'm vaccinated, like the amount of people who say like I'm vaccinated, but I just want things to open. I want the other side of the social contract to be honored. They're trying to do it, I think, in a really respectful way. There's some courage happening there. And for a long time, we've struggled to find where our courage points are as a country. And I think what's happening in Ottawa should not be seen through the lens of what Trudeau said. I think when he said, you have a right to protest, you have a right to make your voices heard loud and clear. You do not have a right to shut down our democracy and our democratic processes. And I don't think that convoy is intending to do any of that. And I think that they are owed a fair due. They are owed a meeting with the prime minister. And if they can have the courage to sit out in the cold tonight, then me as a conservative on your podcast, the true den of the enemy, I think I can have the courage to say to you, Nate, that they're deserving to meet with the prime minister and that he should emerge from his bunker and do that.
I do not share your purview, as you have said. And I'll tell you, I do believe that there is. I have certainly read some stories where they have talked about community, and I have certainly read some stories where they have talked about they're there because they are concerned about the people in their communities who have lost businesses, and I don't want to diminish that, but at the same time, when people are taking a dump on the National War Memorial,
when one person is doing that, but they don't speak for the group. This is always measuring a movement by its lowest common denominator, and that's not fair.
I'm measuring the movement by the reaction to the lowest common denominator.
What do you propose they do? Shiv him in the neck?
Well, no, I feel like that's a little extreme, but wow. Certainly the way that I would have a very different reaction if, as soon as that first swastika went up, people were tearing it down. I would have a very different reaction if, as soon as people started walking around with yellow stars of David, other people were saying that's not acceptable and taking them off. I would have a very different reaction if, when somebody had defaced the Terry Fox monument, when somebody had defecated on the National War Memorial, if that crowd, because of their Canadian values and because of their focus on unity and dignity and respectful discourse, if they had all said, "Nuh-uh, you don't," and instead of letting those things sit there for any length of time, had immediately worked to make sure that they were gone. We didn't see that happen.
But don't forget, you've got this massive collection of people. Nobody knows who's in charge. I agree that there should have been more controls put around defacing and very sort of racially motivated, punishing images or statements. But I've also seen the footage today of the Terry Fox monument where there's flowers all around it and it's roped off. So I've also seen the footage of the guy who showed up with the Confederate flag and was booed right out of there. If you want to talk about a threat to safety, I worried about that guy's safety. Shouldn't have been there. Shouldn't have had that disgusting symbol. Should have been out of there, but was removed. They said, hang your head, get out of here. We don't want you here. But you also have to be mindful that they absolutely talk about have to have impeccable behavior. Everybody is looking to write these guys off as a group that wants to be violent and angry and confrontational. And they are doing their absolute level best to hold it steady and to say, you cannot dismiss us. You may have been able to dismiss us when we couldn't outseat a liberal government. You may have been able to dismiss us when we said we were coming. You may think you can dismiss us now by taking away our gasoline and having the CBC continue to vilify us, but we're not going away. And I think you have to look at how this movement is trying to exist in a space where it is engineered to fail.
But it's engineered to fail by its own. Here's the thing. I don't need anyone's permission to take down a Nazi flag. I don't need that permission. If I see a Nazi flag, I'm going to take it down. It's that simple.
Listen, you'd have taken it down. I'd have taken it down. Many people there would have taken it down. You have to know that so many people were probably like, someone's probably in charge of that or something. I'm not making any excuses. Believe me, I don't want this to be me making any excuses, but I will say that we're not in Ottawa. We don't know what's happening. We're sitting in our homes in Calgary, trying to have a discussion about what we anticipate is happening in our nation's capital. The argument that we should be having is, where is the prime minister? Where is the prime minister? As tensions will continue to rise, he's waiting for it to fail. Where is the prime minister to meet with this group?
And I'll agree with that. I think that one of the things that we're seeing is a fundamental failure of leadership across the board. I mean, one of the things that you said in there was, and I've certainly seen people in the convoy saying this, and I have not limited myself to only the condemnation journalism of this event. But the fact that you referenced that, I think, indicates just how lost the communications are on this, because the fact that there are people out there who are saying now that the pandemic can be over. It's not.
Yeah. So where is the government leadership to have that meaningful discussion? Because
absolutely,
but
that's where I want to see the leaders of our
responsibility of leadership is about managing people's sense of threat. That is some of the most important work you do as a leader. In the absence of that, you're going to have a coordinated response. When it's met with silence, then the other group establishes their perspective as the new way forward.
But that's what I want to see. I agree with you 100%. Justin Trudeau has abdicated his role in this, and his part of his job should absolutely be to come out and say, "Hey, I hear your frustrations. If you guys can go without the Confederate flags and the Nazi flags, I'm willing to have some conversations in a reasonable manner, as we do in this country."
I'm giving you 2 days to find your speakers. Because I think at this point you got to find your speakers that represent the iterative nature of what the convoy is now.
Sure, but that also needs to be hedged in. But you need to understand the pandemic is not over. It's not going to be over tomorrow. It's not going to be over next week. We're not going to be in a place, especially in provinces like Alberta, where our healthcare system is disproportionately taxed in comparison to some, like, when I say taxed, I don't mean literal taxed. I mean, like, on the brink of failure.
Stressed.
We don't have the bandwidth in our healthcare system to be able to just go, let's see what happens again. I mean, I was following on Twitter last night. There were multiple reports where there were no ambulances available in the province of Alberta in major municipalities. And now's the time that you want to pull the cord and see what happens. That's part of the conversation that needs to happen. But that's not the conversation that's happening. We're seeing abdication of that conversation from the Liberals. I've said this to you before. I'm not a Trudeau fan. Because I do see this. It's what I don't see that bothers me more than anything. But at the same time as that's going on, you've got the heavy hitters in the conservative movement, in the absence of O'Toole, saying, yeah, now that the pandemic can be over, we need to be opening up everything. And that's, I mean, you've got, I don't know that we would say the literal den of the enemy here, but the
Oh, come on.
I don't have a problem saying that there's a lot of progressive leaders who have shit the bed on this one. I don't have a problem saying there's a lot of conservative leaders who have shit the bed on this one. The conversation that I'm really interested in having is, why do they keep doing that to the bed?
Yeah, okay. So I can answer that question. I've been waiting for you to ask me this question all night. And I'll say it's because it's because we have the same problem occurring at all of our most critical societal pivot points. Federally, the Prime Minister of Canada has said, anyone who disagrees with me is intolerant. And if you are intolerant, therefore you are disqualified from having a meaningful conversation with me, where we would disclose all this information and come to an agreement together. So then we're like, okay, we'll just have conflict then. Then in our news media, we report a single narrative and say anybody else who has a counter narrative to what we report is intolerant. So then we can't talk to each other. Then we can't talk about facts as facts, because facts become feelings, and then we govern by feelings. So then we're lost on the war on disinformation. So to recap, out on the big leader, out on the way in which we construct information, and information is dispelled into our community as a society, 35 million of us. And then we come home provincially, and we have a provincial premier who says, well, everyone who disagrees with my decision making is intolerant. And we go, well, then how are we going to work together as a society? Okay, we'll just push against each other then. In everything we do, there will be winners and there will be losers. And it is striking to me that we talk about, oh, conservatives are the problem, or liberals are the problem. The epidemic is the same issue. It is governing, not understanding the difference between leadership and authority, and saying to ourselves, anyone who disagrees with us is intolerant. And if you are a resident of the city of Calgary, you will know that this mayor's first 100 days has been defined by the very same thing. And then we wonder why, as a society, we struggle. We wonder why we're burning out. We wonder why we're frustrated. We wonder why we can't talk to each other. We wonder why we're saying things that we never thought we'd say, which is, people who don't share my point of view, I just can't be friends with anymore. Because we've decided then at a cellular civic level that we'll adopt the same problem where the fish sinks from the head, which is anyone who disagrees with my point of view is intolerant. And as we do, our vaccination rates sit at 80%. Our fights about wearing a mask, not wearing a mask continue. And there has to be a winner and there has to be a loser. And in all in the mix of that, when we have an opportunity for someone to rise up and say, I can do better, they're saying, no way, I won't, because the playbook of polarization is working. It's working. And that's why Erin O'Toole is not serving us. And that's why if here in Alberta, we switch to an NDP government, it won't serve us either. Because if we think that Rachel Notley is going to serve something else, we're wrong. And that is why I'm pleased to announce that today, Nate Pike will be assuming the position as the leader of the Alberta Party, the only political party, I think, in this province that can totally right this ship. So you can send your campaign donations for Nate to the GoFundMe that's been established to elect him as the leader of the
Love
party.
that you brought the GoFundMe in. That was the little the cherry on top of that bit there. That was
Yes.
No,
well,
but
and strong, they say.
You
cannot disagree with what I said. You cannot disagree with what I said.
That's why I've been trying to get you for the last hour and a half. And this is why I enjoy talking with you so much, Jen, because I obviously we do have differing opinions on a couple things, but it is so important to me that we're able to have conversations. It is so important to me. I think fundamentally, you and I share the exact same concern in that the people who are leaders, and I'm like air quoting the hell out of this for everybody who's listening to the audio version of our podcast. The people who are leaders right now aren't leading. They are self-serving. They're interested in self-preservation, and they're not willing to put people ahead of their own goals. And I think that if there's anything that Albertans, Calgarians, Canadians should be able to get together on, it should be that that's not okay, and we have to demand better.
That's right, and we should demand better.
I'm more than happy to argue about some of the nuances of conservative policy versus whatever the hell I am. I can do that all day long, but if we can't get to a place where we can have that conversation and know that the person who's leading that conversation is going to do so in a sincere way, pursuing the better interests of the society, then we're just screwed.
And I think we have to have an understanding and an appreciation that we are a good society. We are hardworking, smart, kind, generous people. We are remarkable as citizens. We need leadership now that represents that in us. It's out there, but we're going to keep calling up people that want to fight, want to polarize so long as we tolerate it.
I would also throw in there, we need a little bit less Americanization.
Yeah, America needs less Americanization. So we definitely do. Yeah, no, we need something that's uniquely us.
On this, I think we can wholeheartedly agree.
Yes.
Jen, when is the third season coming out? It feels
man.
I've waited too long.
I know. It'll be done when it's done. I've made a commitment that courage is calling, and I want this to be the boldest season I've ever done. And so I have to have the courage to be unpopular and the courage to be bold. And when I can manifest that in 8 episodes, you'll find it drop into your podcast feed.
Excellent. Well, I will look forward to it. I really enjoyed season 1 and 2. I always enjoy our conversations. And I really enjoy the fact that we keep coming back and having more, because that's, I think, what everybody needs a little bit more of. So thank you for taking a much larger part of your time and your evening than I think that you were probably planning on for this conversation. Is there anything else you want people to hear? Anything else you want people to know about the Jen Sanford experience?
No, I just think that the one message that I would really leave with tonight is that what you have witnessed here for an hour and a half is 2 people that are politically and ideologically different, finding the places where they connect, understanding that our strengths really are our differences. And that conversation can occur in community parks, in dinner parties, in office places, all around this province. We are not what we are represented to be by our elected leadership. And we can demonstrate that by the way in which we come together and talk to one another, talk to each other, not at each other. And I think that you'll find that that's not a conservative ideal or a liberal ideal or anything in between. That's a Canadian ideal.
Perfect. And the only thing I would add to that is never, ever, 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 ever bring a Nazi flag to any party.
Obviously. Or we're going to shivvy in the neck. Seems so violent. That seems so violent.
What, who said that? Why is it that conservatives have so much repressed violence and rage? I don't understand.
Come on.
Jen, thank you so much again.
Thanks for having me, Nate.
As always, if you appreciate the kind of content that we're trying to produce here at The Breakdown, we would love it if you swung by our Patreon page at www.patreon.com/thebreakdownab and signed up for a small monthly sponsorship of the work that we're trying to do here. It is because of the support that we receive from our Patreon sponsors that we're able to continually up our game, and it is tremendously appreciated. So I want to throw a big thank you out to them, and you can go ahead and visit that website and join and support us as well, because we need all the help we can get. Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you so much for listening and being part of these important conversations. And we will see you next time on The Breakdown.